Let's talk now about seatbelts, because there are concerns over a growing number of people not wearing a seatbelt while behind the wheel, and now drivers could face penalty points and a ban if caught without their belt on.
Yeah, the change is being considered as part of new road safety plans set to be published this year. At the moment, if a driver or one of their passengers isn't wearing a seatbelt, they can only be given a £100 fine, with that increasing to £500 if taken to court.
Yeah, joining us now in the studio is Executive Director of the Parliamentary Advisory Council for Transport Safety, David Davis. David, thank you for coming in and speaking to us. Really appreciate it. First of all, just give us an idea of the problems, the growing problem with people not wearing a seatbelt. It seems like everyone's wearing a seatbelt.
Well, good afternoon. And yes, seatbelts are a good news story. They have saved thousands of lives over the last 40 years. And the vast majority of people wear a seatbelt without a second thought, really. But there is a percentage, and although it's a small percentage, it's a significant percentage who choose not to wear a seatbelt or forget, or for whatever reason don't belt up. That's often combined with risky behaviour like speeding or drinking or driving on country lanes late at night. And that combination can be absolutely lethal. And if you have a crash, obviously seatbelt doesn't cause the crash, but it's a thing that will most likely save your life. So the government has done lots of messaging over the years. People remember the adverts and so forth, or most people do anyway. But I think we've taken our eye off the ball a bit. And we did some research recently and showed that maybe between 200 and perhaps 300 people a year are dying not wearing a seatbelt, which is a big, that's 10-15% of all the deaths in the UK. It's maybe 25-30% of all drivers that die. So it's still an issue, even though it's a minority. And we think we'd like the government to consult on the penalties, because, frankly, it's just an anomaly that if you are caught using a mobile phone, you get 6 points in your licence and a £600 fine. Drinking and drug driving carry very, very heavy penalties, and quite rightly. Speeding, you can get at least 3 points, if not significantly more, and a bigger fine. Seatbelts, where there's a high risk of death, there's only the fine, and in fact many people are offered an online course, so even less. And I think consequently the police have taken their eye off that particular ball. The road safety authorities have taken their eye off the ball, and as we know from any sphere, if people feel there's not much of a penalty, police aren't really taking it seriously. I know it's against the law, but actually, I'm not quite so bothered. So we think having penalty points would reinforce that message.
Yeah. Why are people not belting up?
Well, I think it's a combination of, just feeling that it's not such an issue anymore. I think there are some people who perhaps feel they've got a big new car, it's got an airbag, there's lots of protection, they don't need to wear the seatbelt. And that's wrong, because the seatbelt is the bedrock of the safety system. The airbags only really work if you're wearing a seatbelt. So I think that could be part of it. But, if you go back to the penalties, frankly, if you are moderately wealthy, a £100 fine isn't going to fuss you too much. On the other hand, if you've got some points on your licence from some other offence, another 3 points might tip you towards the ban. Now, we're not advocating banning drivers for not wearing seatbelts, but it should be part of the picture.
What about passengers? Because perhaps, is this problem being amplified by those sort of, car-on-demand services, the app-based services? Because I was just thinking then, certainly when I jump into the back of, a private hire vehicle, do I always belt up? I'm not actually sure I do. If I were to be totally honest, I'm not sure I necessarily do every time, unless the driver says, oh, please, can you put on your seatbelt? Does that make me sort of part of a majority or a really naughty minority?
Well, I mean, you are committing an offence, and the fine could apply to you. In some countries, the driver is held responsible for the passengers. That's a possibility. That could be consulted on, certainly. Certainly, at the moment, the driver is responsible for passengers under 14. That could be extended to all passengers. Most taxis I've been in, they have a sign saying, please belt up. Whether they remind you or not, it depends.
I wonder how many other people out there do what I do. And look, I'm not saying I do that every time, but I'm pretty certain there've been odd journeys when I've sort of, rolled into the back seat and not buckled up.
Do you know what's surprising is you were talking about these new cars, like SUVs, 4x4s that give people a sense of complacency about their safety. I don't have either of those vehicles, but I tell you what, if my passenger doesn't put their seatbelt on, I get this annoying noise that reminds me to put them on, and I don't understand how someone can drive along with that noise constantly going because the passenger hasn't put their seatbelt on.
You're right, and those have been very effective. Not all cars have them in the rear seats, so that's one thing. And the problem of not wearing seatbelts is worse in the rear, as you were suggesting. So there is that combination. We'd like to see better automatic reminders work in the rear. But some people do employ defeat devices. They'll put something, they'll sit on the seatbelt.
Ah, I see, OK.
Do we just not need another big public awareness campaign? Because certainly when I was a kid growing up, I remember all of them, the crash test dummies, like flying through bits of glass and, if you don't wear your seatbelt at the back seat, you murder the driver and stuff like that. And it really did, I can remember them. It did hit home.
Yeah.
Surely what we need is just to push that back out again.
That would help, but it's much more effective if there's a bit of stick as well. We're not talking about heavy enforcement. We're just saying knowing people could get that extra penalty, are likely to be prosecuted if they are caught by the police. That pushes home the message.
Yeah. Now, before you go, David, a quick thought on e-scooters. Because, I was just thinking, while you're here, it's a big topic that everyone's debating. I mean, I lived in Brussels before moving back to London, and I hate them. I think they're so dangerous, both for pedestrians and road users. Where are you at on this? Because, of course, the government's thinking right now about whether, with various pilot schemes, whether to introduce e-scooters, en masse around the UK.
We're trying to keep an open mind on it. In fact, we are running a research project. We are concerned, though, because the government is focusing very much on the rental schemes. And by and large, I think the well-specified, well-run rental schemes can operate reasonably safely. But what's going on at the same time is about 500,000 privately owned scooters. They're selling like hotcakes. It's not illegal to sell them. It's only illegal to use them. They are being used widely in all sorts of circumstances on the pavements. And there have been at least 10 deaths that we're aware of in the last 18 months or so. Now that's 10 compared with a lot of deaths in cars, so that's not a lot, but it's growing. And we think the government needs to get a grip on it because it's putting the police in a hugely difficult position. They're supposed to be enforcing the law. And
I think most people don't know what the law is. Do you have to have insurance for having an e-scooter on the road? Can you allow to whiz along on pavements? I mean, people are, like you said, getting these things.
It's almost entirely impossible to use it legally on the road or even, frankly, in any public place unless you have specific permission. You should have insurance and you won't get it. You certainly can't ride on the pavement any more than you can ride, a bicycle or a motorcycle or a car on the pavement. They are a motor vehicle technically, and nobody has insurance or the right to use them. Yeah. So, we would call on some of the retailers to be a lot more responsible than they are.
Yeah, I've covered this story and spoken to e-scooter owners in London, and they're just not. One guy thought he legally could ride it. In fact, he'd ridden it all the way from South East London to West London, thinking he had the right to ride. So there is a problem with awareness. But David, thank you for speaking to us. Really appreciate it, David Davis there from the Parliamentary Advisory Council on Transport Safety. Time for us to belt up, I think.
Yes, every time. Remember that, people. Protect yourself and protect others.
Yep, metaphorically as well as literally. Because after the break, we'll be hearing about the girl who suffered serious burns as a baby and her incredible road to recovery. Before that, it's the weather.